Welcome, everybody, to CETI AI Space, where we're trying to decentralize AI across the galaxy. We have a special guest, obviously David Johnston, up on the stage, who is an open source contributor. At least I think that's what your title is at Morpheus. That's what I saw on one of your social media posts, but let me know if I'm wrong there.
You got that right. It's a fully decentralized team. So open source contributors, capital subnets, compute, and builders. Yeah, bringing everybody together.
Perfect. I love that. And we also have Logri joining us from CETI to talk some scaling inference and future of enterprise grade compute, decentralized AI, and all of the wonderful things that we've all been working on the last year or so. We're going to dive into probably the most critical and innovative hot topic over the last year, I'm hoping. And with their powers combined, we're pretty much putting the biggest brains that I know of on stage right now to talk decentralized AI. And I've got a couple questions pre-prepared, but I wanted to give you guys each a second to talk about what you've been working on lately in terms of the last couple months with Morpheus, obviously with your Homestead launch. And I know we had some questions about Venice that the community gave me to ask you guys, but give me an idea of what you guys have been working on.
Yeah, sure. Moving into the Homestead era has been all about compute. So the Morpheus router, the goal is to bring together all the major players like SETI and others to be able to provide AI models to any agent builder that wants to use them. And the goal for Morpheus is to do that across chain, across frameworks. Morpheus is a neutral platform, right? It's not beholden to one blockchain. It's fully decentralized. There's no foundation or DAO. Its goal is to weave together all the different infrastructure and platforms so agent builders have one place where they can grab the compute and other resources that they need. Yeah, that's kind of the big focus. I just put out an article a couple days ago, I guess last week, about 2025. And yeah, it's pretty cool to see the whole ecosystem catching up to what we've been saying about agents. And agents are really driving the narrative right now, whether it's AI16Z or virtuals or the folks that are building Theric or others. There's so many great agent platforms that really burst onto the scenes the last few months. And Morpheus's goal is to support them all, right? With compute, with capital, and with coding tools. So yeah, it's wild to see it go from ideas and white papers last year to all of a sudden there's working code and everybody's creating an agent, and you see it really take off the last few months. So yeah, it's really rewarding. But yeah, so I think 2025 is going to be pretty incredible, and yeah, excited to be here with you guys.
Appreciate that. And I think I have the article you're referencing pinned above. So if anybody has not taken the opportunity to check that out, please do so. And Logan, the same question for you. What is it that SETI has been up to lately? I know, but maybe not everybody else does.
Yes, in the month of November, we were working a lot on getting integrated into that Homestead release that David just mentioned. There was definitely some back and forth there, right? I think that we were trying to be more than just users. We're trying to be partners with them. So that involves sometimes doing some diagnostics, debugging, writing bug reports, helping to fix things, and just consider perspectives from an operator point of view that they may not have considered themselves, right? This relates sometimes to things like billing, or sometimes related to what diagnostics we'd like to see from dashboards, panels that they're making, right? But that was definitely a major focus, as well as just going to DevCon and working on business to business arrangements for November. December's been mostly about stability for us. It's been take what Morpheus had and then convert it to Helm charts that they're running Kubernetes, and we have self-healing containers. We'd like to contribute that back to the code base from Morpheus as well, but we haven't yet really polished the pipeline, the contribution, the permissions, everything that would get us set up in the code provider system they have running there. Otherwise, it's been things like working on our network topology to get the most out of the equipment that we've had purchased, getting up the InfiniBand connections for parallelizing the very large models across multiple boxes, migrating some of the compute between brokers to optimize the rates that we're getting, and offering a wider variety of models, both on Morpheus and increasingly we're going to be trying to bring up some of the S19 models as well and sell Morpheus compute to S19 miners secondhand. That's just a few things. There's a lot more going on. We have an operations end, we have an AI and inference server end, and And we're developing the intelligent compute fabric as we go, and the CUDA priority schedulers and the design stages. So all these things are ongoing efforts. There's just a lot of spinning plates.
That's a really great summary. And if I could just add to that, I think SETI did an incredible job of contributing to the open source and the testing of the compute router on Morpheus. And certainly all of that feedback has helped improve it. And the next step, now that the rewards are live at the smart contract level, will be adding the dashboards where it's easy for anybody in the community to stake their more tokens towards SETI, right? And help generate rewards for them as a builder, as a compute provider, right? That's the next unlock that we'll probably see this week, early next, is as those dashboards go online. Gives an easy way for people to do that without having to poke around the smart contracts, but do that directly in a no-code dashboard. So yeah, that's the next step.
Yep. I think we should probably highlight why people would want to do. So first off, the Lumerin router has a way of ranking. You think of the Lumerin router as a load balancer. Someone wants to create a session with a node operator, and that node operator is going to serve a model. The model configuration is already known, but there's this load balancer, and it's trying to assess who gets what percentage of the pie chart, if you will, amongst all of the subnets that are registered there. And having more MOR tokens staked or delegated to you increases the percentage of the traffic that you receive, which increases the percentage of the revenue that you can get. The second thing that it does, correct me if I'm wrong, David, is there is a cap on the amount of more that we can earn per year based on the amount that we have staked to us, and you increase basically the upper end revenue of what we can make from the Morpheus system by delegating tokens to us.
Yep, that's exactly it. So like you said, it increases your reputation in the router. That's how you know somebody is a reliable actor, is you put something at stake, right? And having an on-chain action with staking is easy to look at and put into the reputation. And then secondly, yeah, you can increase your rewards and lift that cap that you're talking about more and more staked. Yeah, those are well-proven dynamics. If you look at BitTensor or Virtuals or others, they use similar mechanisms when it comes to staking to subnets and using those as sort of key variables. So that'll be a great way for a lot of people to get involved and support SETI and increase the routing of inference and other things towards them.
The next thing I'd like to talk about, you brought up S19. I'd really like to talk about some of what makes Morpheus different than S19, because we have been on both. One of which is how they do this, your reputation. So S19 is trying to do some type of proof of work system where you do synthetic work that they understand call it the shape of. They have this log props thing the validators are using. And then they're trying to say, did you conform to that known shape? And if so, then you're doing the work honestly. And then they're going to send you a lot of that synthetic work in order to build a set of, quote, trusted validators that they're going to send the real work to. So validators are supposed to have their own websites, and they're supposed to be bringing in inference, and they're supposed to be sending that inference to the miners and monetizing it themselves in order to justify the outlay of all the tau, right? But Morpheus doesn't do anything like that. They really just go for, are customers happy by how long do they hold the sessions open? If someone isn't giving you good inference, you go and you generate a session with a different provider. And it steps away from trying to do like a zero knowledge proof of inference or fingerprinting, though we may get to that later. This is specifically the Lumerin router. Okay, so then we add in the Morpheus stake as a second signal. Are there any other signals I'm not aware of, David? What else goes into the reputation?
Those are really what drives it, right? How long the sessions are open is a great proxy for how happy people are with the results that they're getting. And then the amount staked. There's a few other knobs that are in the contract available. You can look at tokens per second and things like that. But those are the two that really drive the most important calculations.
And the advantage of doing it the way that Morpheus and the Lumerin router are doing it is it eliminates all the artificial synthetic work. 2/3 of the work that we were getting from S19 when we had slots there were just synthetic requests, right? You can just look at the symbols involved in it, and you can very easily determine what's synthetic and what isn't. And that's a flaw if you think about it. But 2/3 of the work that we were doing was just to get into the trusted validator set. And if you just think about the amount of inference that we can serve, 2/3 of the useful economic value of the machines was being wasted for some type of Sybil resistance or honesty assessment thing. And Morpheus just bypasses that by having kind of a momentum to your reputation, right? And so people that join the system and outlay all the capital, they're incentivized to earn return on that capital. And if you lose all your reputation, they don't even necessarily have to slash you. They just have to stop giving you money, basically, right? And then you'll find that all that delegated stake is no longer capital efficient. Money will go where it's treated better. So it removes entire complicated systems from the development. It allows them to execute faster, but it also just makes the system more economically efficient, and it makes it less opinionated as well. So there's a bunch of ways that S19 or BitTensor have designed within their subnet that you can't change. I can't just like easily fork an S19 and have it operate under slightly different rules or slightly different incentives. But I can quite easily layer another Lumerin router on top of Morpheus, right?
I think that's a really good description. Really credit to Ryan Condron and the folks at Lumerin and, their inspiration to contribute all this code base to Morpheus, has given it 2, 3, 4 years of development that they'd already gone through and thought through all those tokenomics and game theory, and just applying that to AI models from where they had come originally with hash power is a great shortcut to getting to sort of elegant solutions like you're describing.
Next thing I talk about is, okay, so we've talked about decentralized AI, and I view decentralized AI as there's really two different beasts within this. There's a centralized inference, and when we talk about agents, they are inference with custom models, basically, or inference with models with custom prompts as part of the setup. And we'll certainly get into that. But there's also training and decentralized training. And that is something that there is no DPIN offering, like training as a service. There's card hours. You can go to a broker and just rent card hours and do training. But there's not really the equivalent of what we have for Morpheus with inference as a service coming up for training that I can see. I do see some people like Jensen that have been working on it for a couple of years, but I don't think they're near launch. Do you see that coming in the next 2 years, 4 years? Is that not coming at all? What do you think the shape of that is going to look like, David?
Distributed training, like you said, is a lot harder nut to crack than distributed inference, which is pretty mature at this point. You've got proposals from News Research and others. They've demonstrated some training of smaller models. I know some of that has also been done on Akash, but I don't think anybody's cracked 10 billion parameters as far as size, right? There's just a lot of fundamental constraints for training the model in the same location across the same bandwidth. So it's going to be interesting to see if somebody can come up with an elegant solution that will allow for training of larger models. But to agree with what you were saying earlier, I actually think inference is most of the game, right? We've got these now mature open source frontier models, whether it's Llama 3.3 or Grok is open sourcing each of their models one generation older than what they're using on the platform. So Grok 1 is open source. It's the expectation that when Grok 3 comes out, Grok 2 will be open source. So you've got these mature, fundamental, foundational models that everybody's using. And I think that's going to reach a level of satisfaction where it's 99.9%. And the big companies will continue training, but I think most of it's going to move towards inference.
I think that okay, so in terms of, is there a foundational model? Yes. But I think that in order to fine tune every one of those foundational models to your particular use case, there's going to be a lot of fine tuning and personalization of models, especially when you start getting into personal agents. So right now we view agents as, we put this up there and it shows a token for me and it posts on Twitter with a news feed, and there's some other parlor tricks that we do. But really, when you talk about what an AI agent is going to be in the long term, it's going to be personal assistant. Everyone will have their own agent, right? Everyone will have their own personal data feed that they don't want to send out to the internet, to tech giants. And they're going to have that data feed to express their values, their preferences. And then that it's going to get trained into a model that they're going to have that is going to have agency to further those goals and preferences. For example, something that would help to educate you, for example, right? Education's ripe for reform, where you can have a tutor that's available and infinitely patient and available anytime that you want it for as long as you need it. And it's going to be something that can help with scheduling. It's going to be something that help with reminders. It can be something that can help with routing. Every little thing that we already use AI for will get wrapped into those. And some of the things that we use for information retrieval will get wrapped into those. And it's basically going to be a feedback loop where as you live your life, you create a trail of data. You feed that trail of data into these agent systems, into your personal agent with fine tuning, and you just go in a feedback loop of that. Maybe every month or so, there's another personalized agent for you that updates with the most recent data of yours. And it's always in line with your preferences, with your values, with who you are, and furthering your agenda. So I think the training's it's a long tail activity too. It's not just the creation of frontier models, right?
Yeah.
Frontier models have basically learned how to learn. They've learned every language. They've learned shadows. They've learned all the very complicated, hard to describe stuff. And the fine tuning generally is better structured, right? It's, oh, we've got my call center, and here's all the transcripts of all the best representatives that we have, and we're going to use the ranking of those representatives in order to determine the score on it. And so it's relatively well-structured data and much smaller in its target, right? The stuff it's talking about is much more limited. And same thing with games. You're going to have something that understands various art styles, but then we're going to add in a layer that makes it output content that's more aligned with the art style of your particular game or your particular game studio or your particular character design or whatever, right? Every individual character in the game that you're developing may have its own model in order to produce a consistent character. So we're going to see a proliferation, not of the frontier models, but many millions of these sort of fine-tuned personalized models. And I think it'll get to a point where everyone will have their own personalized agent as a norm.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that's a good way to articulate it, is the difference between what's been the focus up till now is people training on public data, but the most valuable data is private data, right? Like,
Most valuable to
yeah,
you. Yeah.
exactly. But it's what's actionable, and it reflects what I actually care about and, what I want to achieve. These are all intents that I'm expressing to my personal agent. So yeah, if you look at my recent article on AI brain power, I basically create a unit of measure for brain power. I define it as 3.33 tokens per second and just match at what a human would produce, which is about 2.5 words per second, right? And if we assume that the models are at about the average human as far as quality of the output of the tokens, you can create this interesting metric where you say, oh, this H100 running this large model can do about 1,000 tokens a second. It's the equivalent of having 300 brain power, right? And the new Blackwell chips look like they'll be 4 times as efficient. And so you're looking at 1,200 brain power for that hardware. And the cool thing is, you think about the comparison. Historically, we talked about horse as a estimate against physical labor. And here now we have an estimate against digital computation, right? Against digital intelligence, right? Just as effectively every human on Earth, there are about 1.5 billion cars now, and they each have 5 or 6 seats each, right? So you've got effectively a seat in a car for every human on Earth. We're going to do the same, like you're saying, with personal agents, because it's literally giving you 100x access to brain power, right? And it becomes much more about the human acting as providing intent or acting as an oracle, confirming what they're,
Or error correction.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the models
And values. So humans in the long term, we're going to be the upper level governance layer. We're going to be the CEO, CTO, et cetera, of humanity. And crypto is creating a lot of attempts at governance over time. They're going to help to align the outcomes of a governing body with the intentions and values of its participants, right? Just something you can see across the world. There's a deep disalignment of the outcomes of civilizations, of societies, versus what the people in there hold dear, right? We're going to hopefully create better governance technologies that closes that feedback loop and creates a better alignment of outcomes versus intention. And we're hopefully going to increase the amount of brain power that everyone has access to. Just Excel, right? A basic calculator, right? An extension of a process that's been going on for 50 plus years. But now is taken in, basically there's been this qualitative change in the capabilities of AI from mostly discriminatory to generative. And now there's this Cambrian explosion of tools and widgets, if you will, that help you to integrate all of that generative AI power into your existing workflows and take I'm seeing an average of 5 to 10 times the output per engineer, per artist, per, it's going to be driver, per customer service rep, per doctor, whatever. You're seeing this multiplier in the output of each of them, assisted by basically this enhanced brain power, as you said, this human brain power expansion.
It's a beautiful thing. That's why we're all
It
not
can be, yeah.
living on farms and doing subsistence farming to survive, because we have access to huge amounts of physical labor. I saw one estimate. If you just look at the BTUs of energy expended by tractors and cars and everything else, it's equivalent to 100 people worth of physical power, right? So every one of us now has a 100x multiplier on our physical abilities, right? And we're about to get that 100 or 1000x multiple on our mental abilities. You know, if Jobs famously said the personal computer was like a bicycle for the mind, AI is going to be an electric car for the mind, right? It fits. Everybody's going to want one, right? And so in the article, I actually calculate, you look at the NVIDIA production of chips this year, and you add up the brain power for all those chips produced, even presuming 70% availability of those GPUs, you're talking about getting to 50 trillion hours of computational labor, 50 trillion hours of brain power, compared to the 7 trillion hours that humanity has today, available from 3.5 billion people in the workforce times 2,000 hours a year of actual working time, right? And so this is going to be the year that brain power from AI surpasses humanity's brain power. And I think that's incredible. And to your point, though, for the governance, honestly, the more decentralized, the better, right? It's the same reason you want a personal phone and personal laptop and a personal car and a personal home. They're the same reasons you're going to want a personal AI, right? It's going to be deeply intimate to what you care about and all of your most critical data and information. And honestly, I want it working for me and not for some company or for some government, right? And
Yeah. So if it's not owned by you, especially if the training is being paid for by not you, then you can be sure that there's going to be value extracted somehow. It's either going to be extracted in something that's like a subscription model. If I go and pay for a monthly fee, it's either going to be on that model, or it's going to be on a advertisement model, which is basically, I'm not getting paid for you doing Google searches. I'm getting paid for manipulating your behavior on the search results,
Yep.
right? I'm no longer giving you the optimal result or what you asked for. I'm giving you the results that are going to manipulate your behavior and something that's profitable to me. The former option, I think people, just for whatever reason, people don't like a $5 a month subscription. They just don't. And the latter option, I think, is really scary and dangerous to humanity. And I think decentralized AI offers a beautiful alternative to all of that, where you can basically just pay as you go, including paying for your own training, and keep your data private. And we're going to have a bunch of technologies, whether it's multi-party computation or trust execution environments or FAG or conglomeration of those, that will let you do training while keeping your data private in the long run. On those personalized agents, do you think those are going to be 10 billion parameter models? Do you think those are going to be larger parameter models? Are they going to be training? Are you going to have your own personal frontier model? Or are you just going to have a small shim in front of it of something that's much smaller that acts as a filter to that model, to the frontier model?
Depends on the timing. Like you said today, most of these AI agents are really prompt engineering. Here's a prompt, but they're going to evolve. They're starting with these sort of frivolous and silly meme coins and stuff like that. That's how it always starts. Ethereum had to have its ICO and CryptoKitties craze long before it got DeFi and stablecoin payment rails and all the things we see today. I'm not dismissive at all of this phase. I think it's an inevitable phase. But yeah, we're going to get to RAGs. We're going to get to more sophisticated ways to train the models. But I think you're going to have a lot of the intent detection on device. If you look at NVIDIA's,
that's how we do edge compute in a lot of the world, in any IoT space, right? Whether it's on farming or it's driving or whatever, we've got a lot of intent classification or intent detection, as you said, running on the edge.
Sure.
And then the fulfillment of that requires connectivity for a lot of those intents.
And even now, most phones and certainly most laptops can be running an 8 or 10 billion parameter model, but the hardware keeps getting better, right? NVIDIA just released a effectively personal AI supercomputer for $3,000.
$3,000?
That's going to
take exciting.
A petabyte of computation, or it's an enormous amount of compute in these GPUs in the Blackwell architecture, and for $3,000. So that's going to be able to run fairly large models in almost like a new kind of personal computer type of way.
I agree with you, but I think that right now it's basically a prompt engineering. I think
Yeah.
pretty soon, maybe this year, maybe next year, we're going to start seeing people that rather than just doing prompt engineering, they're going to be retraining the model. And then I think the size of the model that's being retrained is going to grow until it approaches for the most important use cases, right? If you're trying to game the stock market or something, I think that the personalized models that do that are going to be as large as the frontier models eventually.
Yep. And if you scroll through the article, there's this incredible graph where we basically think about logarithmically access to brain power. And you have one brain power to express intent. And then you have this bigger circle of smart agents that are your personal agents acting on your behalf. But then you have this much larger circle that encompasses all third-party agents, right? And I think most of that will be run remote, but you'll be treated it almost like an API, right? These agentic to agentic interactions will seem a lot like a microservice, and your intents will get translated into maybe 100 interactions, go complete a task and come back.
So to follow up a bit on, you'd said that there were some fundamental limitations on training. I want to break that apart a little bit. I understood what you meant, but I think that it's really important that people understand how this relates to physical infrastructure because it is instrumental to the purpose or the value to the world that SETI AI brings. So when you have a model and you have your, I don't know, 400 gigabyte, 400 billion parameters, right? And you want to train that model, you take the giant petabyte of data, you chop it up into a bunch of pieces, and you send those pieces to machines somewhere. And every time they iterate over the data, they emit something called a gradient, which is basically a delta to the model, right? Now, if you have 400 billion parameters and you have 400 billion changes, you basically have a gradient that's the same size as the model. So if the model is a terabyte, then every gradient that's emitted is another terabyte. And if you chop that petabyte of data up into 1,000 pieces, then you have a petabyte, 1,000 pieces times a terabyte of gradients that somewhere, somehow, someone has to download and aggregate into the next iteration of the model called the checkpoint. And that has to happen every time you have a pass over the data. And that is a lot of bandwidth. That is a petabyte of bandwidth every couple hours, right? It really, 10 gigs a second does not cut it, right? 50 gigs a second doesn't really cut it. At some point, in order just the data transmission speeds for all of this to occur, you are looking with today's models at upwards of 500 gigs a second required, basically transmission speeds, right? And you're not going to get that running a decentralized training network, running 1 million nodes around the world like Ethereum does, right? We're just talking orders of magnitude more bandwidth requirements. It's not even talking about the amount of compute that NVIDIA might be able to put in your home. It's saying literally you cannot transmit at the speed of light using the fiber optic cables that we're laying everywhere fast enough to communicate between people in Asia and people in Europe and the people in the US in order to distribute the new checkpoint and download the gradients in time to basically have a decent economic utilization of the compute. And as a result, you're going to get at least concentrated data centers doing training, just at least big enough to output the personalized model at this scale as that grows, right? It'll need to be a larger data center. But you'll need to, today, if you're going to make a frontier model that is an iteration, or you make a personalized model that's an iteration of the frontier model, you need about a $50 million facility just to basically train at full speed. Otherwise, you're waiting on bandwidth. And so for that, you have these things called AI neoclouds, which is basically what SETI AI is, right? We have a single AI neocloud. And we want to make it so that we're not subject to the jurisdiction in a single part of the world. We want to make it so that the US court system can't just say, don't train for those people. You have to KYC them in order to do training. And they will, right? Let me just stop there for a moment, David. Are you following what I'm saying? Does that agree with your assessments? See where I'm going with this?
That is where the law of physics lead us. And so I would frame it, instead of decentralized, I would say the objective ought to be distributed training so that we have the censorship resistance you're talking about.
So the goal of SETI AI is to get a AI neocloud in enough different jurisdictions that when each of those jurisdictions tries to crack down on it, we go to the court system in that jurisdiction. We say, look, you can stop us from training for people in Iran or India or China or whatever, but the other 19 jurisdictions won't. So all you're doing is denying this country the economic benefits of this activity. you're not going to actually shut down decentralized training. You're just going to hurt yourself.
Yeah. 100%.
And you don't need 20 of 20 of those jurisdictions to agree with that. You need like 3 of the 20 of those jurisdictions to agree with that. And then you just push all the remaining compute that you can into the remaining jurisdictions that are favorable for it. And when you achieve that, you have basically enshrined the right to compute for all of humanity in the same way that cryptocurrency enshrined the right to transact for all of humanity.
Yep. Exactly. Bitcoin does not care where the hash power is. And when it got pushed out of China, Texas was happy to absorb all the Bitcoin miners and hash power that wanted to use their affordable electricity and giant grid. So yes, I think that ought to be the objective, is censorship resistance and having it be distributed. That gives you 99.9% of the benefit.
And that is basically where SETI AI is bringing value to the world, because any given Bitcoin miner is a centralized enterprise, right? It's not really decentralized compute if you're just running Antminers or whatever, right? It's only when you get a bunch of these different entities that are around the world that you get a decentralized compute, right? A censorship resistant and resilient network for Bitcoin, or for Ethereum and proof of work, or increasingly for AI and AI training. And that's basically the ethical play. The reason that we're doing this, as opposed to any other financial play, is we're trying to guarantee the right to compute for anyone in the world.
Yeah, and it's certainly headed in the right direction. Last October, when the executive order came out and they were threatening KYC and all these other detrimental policies in the US, it was looking pretty dark. And fortunately, it looks like our voice has been heard and people have rallied to this idea of decentralized AI and open source. And the infrastructure's come a long way in the last year and a half. So I think we're on that golden path. And there's still a lot of hostile jurisdictions, especially the EU and China. The UK seems headed in a bad direction, but we'll see how it all plays out. But like you said, we only need a few friendly jurisdictions and effectively it becomes unstoppable.
This is basically a prisoner's dilemma with thousands of countries playing against each other.
Yep.
And we only need a couple defectors. And the larger that set of participants can be, the more favorable the outcome will be in the
Well,
end.
and that's how you could say crypto survived it all, right? There was so much hostility back in 2014. A lot of the early crypto folks were based in New York, and the BitLicense ended up kicking them out. They went to Shanghai.
You look at Electric Capital, and it's just been, the US has been bleeding talent year over year.
But
for
because of the
decades.
friendliness of Switzerland and Singapore and a few other places, it gave enough toeholds for the industry to grow. And now we have a lot more voice and more mass adoption with which to really push back. So it's great to see.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the roadmap of necessary technologies. We've mentioned a few of them, but really what it means to build decentralized AI, because I think there's still a few tools in our tool belt that need development. We may have something that's based on reputation or trust at the moment, and we may be able to evolve towards cryptographic proof of certain things, for example. But basically, what is required for decentralized AI, not just open source? If Meta was to stop outputting frontier models and we wanted to continue to have frontier model development, what has to be developed to enable that? Because I've got a couple answers there, but I'm curious to pick your thoughts first.
Interesting. Like you said, the frontier models are the hardest part, but I think we've got enough players at this point that the energy's actually flipped. They've become very competitive. We went from only a couple of open source models to all of a sudden Google's open sourcing more again. Meta's, to their credit with Llama, really positioned themselves well, and now has gone all in on the idea of being the open source base for AI. And then you've got Grok, right? And then you have Mistral in Europe, and you have other players. And even today or yesterday, you had NVIDIA.
It's definitely a land rush.
Yeah. And then you have the king of kings, NVIDIA, who owns the hardware itself.
He says, we're going to do it ourselves.
Yeah, they released a fine-tune specifically for agents from NVIDIA, right? And you have Google offering their alpha folding models now open source. So it feels like it's really flipped that now, quote unquote, open AI, as in the company that isn't open source at all, is more of an outlier than the norm, right? And instead of last year where it seemed like they were unassailable and so far ahead, the technical gap has really collapsed. on the frontier models. There isn't a big difference between Llama 3.1 405B and GPT-4, right? Maybe it's a few
I
months
think
off
that
that, but
I
it's
think
not
there's going to be
much.
a lot of I think it's going to be a lot of retraining. There's going to maybe be an ensemble neural net or something that comes together to make
Yeah.
multimodal outputs. And I think that there's still going to be a lot of room for personalization for various. You want to have something that can detect cancers. That's there is a you can do that, but it's going to need a lot more fine tuning than just a couple
Yeah.
iterations.
And shout out to Emod. That's a lot of what his new project, Internet Intelligence, Intelligent Internet, is all about, is fine tuning these models for cancer and for other use cases or specific countries or all those niches, right? Once we have the foundational models in place, like you're saying, the game really shifts to fine tuning experts, right, in more narrow fields and then weaving them together so you can pull the
I
appropriate
think in some fields, like medicine specifically, I think it'll be within 5 years, hold stake in the ground. I think within 5 years, it'll be considered negligence not to use an AI to get a second
Yeah.
opinion. As much as we pay for stupid amounts of like blood work and extra diagnostics, everything to be like, oh yeah, we will see it if it's there. The fact that
You'll
you
probably not be shocked to hear California has already blocked that with a law. They're protecting the doctors and the legacy medical providers. So
yeah,
yes, the only exception will be the
they'll get
jurisdiction
leaned.
where they're protecting the taxi unions, to use the Uber analogy.
It'll get leaned on.
Yes.
It's just economically unviable
Yeah.
when everyone else is using AI and you see better healthcare results for less costs. This is an inevitable trend. I think
People just go
at least
somewhere
in
else for care that's 100 times better. Yeah.
yeah, when it was just one state line away, I think people will go north to Oregon or east to Arizona or something out of California for their cancer treatment if they have to. So I think that we need to get some type of. Are you familiar with Sentient AI? Because I think
Yeah.
they're doing something really cool.
Yeah.
So the way that I describe this is they have basically added consent as a requirement to use the output model. So they basically train it with a hash or with a signature on every record that they train it. And if you don't have the signature from the model creator, when you submit the inference to the model, you just get this useless garbled output. And from an AI perspective, or from a economics perspective, that's very fascinating because right now, the moment you put your model up on Hugging Face, you forfeit the economic proceeds of users of that model indefinitely. And with Sentient, you can get it to a point where anyone can download the model. You can distribute it widely, S3, Hugging Face, whatever you want. And then people just have to basically make an API call over to something that presumably a multi-sig could manage in order to sign and return whatever is required to do inference on a per record basis. And that will enable basically that multi-sig to be governed by a DAO and the revenue. Once you need the consent of someone, we're going to attach some type of billing system to it. And we're going to take the revenue and we're going to distribute that to token holders. And we will be able to generate tokens for every one of the models that we wrap with a Sentient AI security billing layer, right? And then we'll be able to add a governance layer on top of that token in order to select who the signers are, as like a multi-sig, and in order to select and do governance over what the data set is, so that the model inherits the values and biases of the DAO that governs it, right? Through curating what records go in, whatever biases you shove into the AI, it's going to inherit those. So I think it's impossible to remove bias from AI, but I do think it's possible to align the bias of the AI in a transparent way so that people can select a model that's powerful and aligns with their biases, aligns with their values, and we can monetize it in a different way than we do right now, where people just pay by session time, right? And no one gets paid for training at all, unless, sell card hours. I think we'll be able to monetize the training by giving those doing the training ownership over the resulting model and a share of the proceeds of the model indefinitely for its use. And then it'll be up to the people doing the training to select those models that should have the highest economic value. You can think of when you're doing training, it's like an investment, and you just have to select the right set of investments in order those that are going to be the most widely used and have the longest runtime in order to get the card hours to pay for the card hours to train all of these fine-tuned models. And I think there's going to be millions of them, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we're going to be able to basically solve this by combining governance technologies that we're developing, the token technologies for fundraising that we're developing and ownership that we're developing, something like Sentient AI for consent for at inference time, and then decentralized AI to allow people to host the model anywhere and serve it, right, across the world.
Yep. I often say that if you want to solve the tragedy of the commons, remove the commons, right? If you want to incentivize people to provide private data, then you have to offer them an incentive, right? And this is how we get all of that private data unlocked in a way that pays people for the value of their information. And that's on the tragedy of what you mentioned earlier with the ad model, right? Is people are creating a lot of value for Google or Facebook to the tune of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a year for the value of their data. And they're getting back a software product that's maybe worth $10 or $100 a year, right? So they're transferring 95% of the value of their data to some big tech company without really understanding that it has value, right? And to your point earlier, we can shift towards that subscription model as soon as people have a passive stream of revenue that's coming off of their data. They're getting paid. Maybe it's not 100%, but maybe it's 50% of the value of their data, right? Through one of the mechanisms that you're describing. And the other group that I would highlight is Vanna, right? Vanna has been one of the groups doing data DAOs, like you're describing, that have a very similar structure. So between Sentient and Vanna, I think there's some really exciting work being done on that front. And that's how you unlock that treasure trove of private data and pay people a fair amount of compensation in the process.
Yeah, and this can really only be done with a combination of crypto and AI. It's very exciting in that regard, right? It really is a beautiful intersection of the two technologies.
That's what I often say is people try to compare centralized and decentralized AI. They're not even in the same ballpark. They're not even playing the same sport, right? The centralized players can't do smart contracts. They can't touch Web3 without a token. They don't have any means of payment. They don't have any persistence for the agents, right? Whereas decentralized AI has solved all these fundamental problems, right? Native programmable intelligence.
100% uptime. Yeah. Ethereum's at 100% uptime.
Yeah.
That's something AWS would blush at.
Sure. Well, and as soon as you give the agent a wallet and it has some Morpheus tokens in there, it can be continually using inference forever because it comes out of the block reward and it gets paid to a compute provider, a compute subnet like CETI. That's a beautiful model because then your agent doesn't stop working when somebody pulls the credit card from ChatGPT. Because let's be frank, a lot of these players right now, it's a ChatGPT wrapper, right? And it's going to stop responding as soon as the credit card becomes invalid, right? So that was the brilliance of Satoshi, is he created a system where the software could pay for its own hardware. And we're extending that to AI. And that's why it's powerful. Like you said, 100% uptime. These agents are never going to go away. And so you can treat them as building blocks and keep building on top of them, presuming they're going to be there a year from now, 10 years from now.
Yeah, it's good. It basically, any sensible tokenomic design basically lists out the necessary actors for a system and makes sure that they have an incentive to be honest, right? This is just like tokenomics 101. And the existing systems are not really well aligned, at least the TradFi systems, the Web2 systems are not really well aligned because what incentive do people have to continue to give them the data? So let's imagine a future where decentralized AI is used for all the information retrieval, and you're using these open source models. I'm no longer feeding all of my information into Google, right? Let's say that we get deep in, we're able to offer basic things like email services, right? Pay as you go, just same sort of thing. We can step by step remove and make it basically go dark from Google's perspective, just remove our data from them, and then take our data and decide how we want to monetize it. So we'll have data markets, and you'll either be able to sell it on something like Ocean Protocol, or as you said, somewhere like Vanna, or you'll be able to join and push your data into various DAOs that, as I said, I think every model will have its own token that will have a claim upon the revenue of its use. And so you'll be able to select which of those models you want to push your data into. And there will be some governance process that enables you to do so and then compensates you for your data in a much more fair way. And so just imagine you said that Google's making somewhere between $1,000 and $10,000 per customer. Just imagine that as like a basic form of UBI. We could just link that, right? And feed that back to society. Like how much better the world would be,
Yep.
right?
Universal earned income. That's right.
And then you layer on some type of values alignment. People could just basically be DeFi senators. And then your reputation can be used as stake, and you can make all kinds of promises using reputation that you build just by existing. And just by passing through the world, leaving footsteps in your wake, you're generating value for society and everyone. And we are building the rails that allow you to capture that back for yourself rather than being predatory.
Network nations, here we come.
Okay, so there's a few things in there. One is, I think we need some type of proof of inference that you use the correct model, that shortcuts weren't taken, right? That's somewhere on the roadmap. And I know that there was some fingerprinting work that was done in Morpheus some time ago. I don't know how far along that's gotten, but that's at least promising. And the important thing I'd say about this proof system is it doesn't have to be on a record by record basis, right? You don't have to generate a ZK proof per record. You have to be able to catch someone eventually. If you're doing 10,000 outputs and you're generating 1 unit of value per output, you just have to have a slashing event of 10,001 and a 1 in 10,000 chance of catching you. In that sense, it's a much more achievable problem than it would seem to be if you tried to make everyone generate a zero knowledge proof on a per inference basis.
I think that's the key here. And what I really like about the Morpheus model is it uses tokenomics and not just technical solutions. So the technical paper you're referring to is hide and seek. And the hide and seek algorithm is a brilliant way to fingerprint and do the test without telling the model it's being tested. And it can classify effectively which family of models is responding, or you can tell from the fingerprint, oh, this is a llama model, or this is a Grok model. And those will continue to get better. But if you think about the tokenomic side of it, it really covers up a lot of edge cases, because to your point earlier, if somebody doesn't like the results, they just cancel the session. Yeah. They get all their tokens back and they go start a session with somebody else, right? And that person automatically loses some reputation. But let's think about the opposite. Let's think about somebody that is trying to trick somebody and say, oh, I've got this model, right? And they've done some magic to make it emulate 405B or something like that. If they do a good enough job and it keeps people happy, does it matter? If you have the tokenomic alignment, right, and you have the automatic feedback of humans acting as oracles, saying if they like the output or not, right, by keeping the session open or closing it, then you can automatically deal with so many of those edge cases. I often use the example in Bitcoin that there isn't a technical mechanism, even today, by which the blockchain forces miners to include transactions in a block, right? Often you'll see once in a while, there's an empty block. The miner didn't bother to put transactions in there for whatever reason, right? Often they do it now because the transaction fees have gotten high enough and they have an economic reason to do it. But for a long time, they put them in there simply because they were earning Bitcoin. They really wanted Bitcoin to work, and they're getting all of their compensation in Bitcoin, right? And so you can use those tokenomic methods to sort of paper over where there are not perfect technical solutions yet.
Absolutely. Having stake in more means that you do not want to tank the price more by cheating it nearly as much.
Yeah,
That's just
exactly.
Having a Bitcoin miner that can only mine Bitcoin as an ASIC means that you probably don't want to look to the 1/10 the value of BTC,
Yes.
right? There's some long-term investment, even if it's not token stake. There is a form of stake for Bitcoin, and it's the hardware,
Yep.
right?
100%.
We covered a lot of things. I just want to review the roadmap. So we had some type of proof of inference. I think there's going to be some type of proof of training. I think there's going to be some type of DAO governance bootstrap thing. Like right now we have these platforms that can bootstrap your own AI agent meme token thing. I think we'll eventually have some that allows you to bootstrap your own personalized agent and a token over it, right?
Mhm.
So I think that'll be a platform. I think that something like Sentient AI, some equivalent. I think some type of privacy thing that keeps your data private even as it is used to train. Something like that would be necessary for a lot of use cases. And what else would you see?
Going to governance, I do want to make the pitch for this new atomic governance model that Morpheus has really pioneered, right? I think DAOs are great. but the DAO that governs best is often the DAO that governs least, right? I would say something like Uniswap might be a gold standard where they achieved product market fit. They had developed for a long time, had a large user base, and then they added a DAO as really just a veto. And if you look at their thresholds, they're very high on the voting. And so you can think of it more as a veto against bad ideas and attackers than a means of developing the product, right? I don't think DAOs are necessarily strong at product development, and you certainly don't want a vote on every micro issue. And so I think the best DAOs are better viewed like the US Constitution and the Founding Fathers. They saw it much more as here's the limited scope of governance. And in this limited scope of governance, there's all these balance of power aspects that it basically prevents bad laws. And so atomic governance is the most pure form of that, right? Every individual can pick the agents, the models, every aspect of the system they want. And you can do that because these are modular systems, right? Morpheus doesn't force compute providers to offer certain models or users to use certain models or to use certain agents, right? It's free and open marketplace. And somebody can walk into the bazaar and pick anything they want, right? And if somebody's willing to offer that model and they're willing to pay for it, then they don't have to coordinate with a million other people to want that model or to pay for that model, right? You only need one pair of the buyer and the seller, right, in the marketplace. And I think that's really beautiful. And is part of why Morpheus has grown so broadly is it's not trying to force people into certain decisions. And it's not a consensus mechanism. Morpheus is not a blockchain or a layer one. It's this modular infrastructure that goes across blockchains, right? It goes across smart contracts, goes across agents and models. And so I think that's really important to emphasize is neutral infrastructure that doesn't have a special interest, isn't owned by one particular group, but is owned by all of the users, and users can make individual decisions. I think that atomic governance model is really powerful, and I hope becomes better understood and others can use it going forward.
I'll bring up other places that are developing good, that have a focus on governance software, like Colony.io. They have an optimistic governance system. So it's like anyone can submit a proposal and then it goes through unless someone decides to veto it. And then it gets into this kind of like subjective consensus, capital escalation type war that you see from oracles and a lot of staking systems if it goes into that. But it enables people to have a DAO that governs a set of decisions, and then also an escalation process that goes up through a hierarchy. And so you can layer these. And this starts to resemble a lot of how, I guess, a corporate structure works. You have a small set of participants in the micro DAO at the leaf level that have, let's say you have a coding team and they're doing something like a code review and they might have a dispute. Be like, okay, that dispute's going to go up to our management layer. And that management layer is going to start talking about like product priorities and whether we should be prioritizing going fast versus zero bug count or whatever, right? There's a values decision to be made there. And then if something is disputed above that level, it might be something about there's allegations of corruption or something, right? And so every time you go up the ladder, you tend to be arguing about more abstract value-based decisions. As you go down the hierarchy, you tend to be more technical, right? So at the leaf level, you tend to be making decisions that have more of an objectivity to them, something where there's like you could be making a prediction based on it, right? Has technical skill in which there is some way of applying knowledge or aptitude in order to improve the outcome of a solution. And then as you go up the hierarchy, you tend to get things that are more subjective, like your flavor of ice cream, right? Where it's not about an objective truth. It's more about what do we choose to enshrine in our values. And I think systems like that are pretty powerful. I also like systems like Coordinate, just say how we want to chop up a pie, who gets what percentage of it, and let everyone vote on that and capture that input and then distribute rewards accordingly. Systems like those are pretty cool. But I think that we need a lot more experimentation in the governance sector. And unfortunately, it's hard to monetize that as a pure play, right? It's hard to go to VCs and be like, I want to develop this governance software and here's how I'm going to make money on it, because the money is in the leaves. It's not in the whole system, and it's not the root.
And if I could build on that, atomic governance is the attempt of saying governance itself can be a marketplace. And each compute provider, right, each builder, each coder in the system can enact whatever they want, right? If they want to have a company, if they want to operate as a DAO, Morpheus is agnostic to the way they do it. But given that the marketplace can signal, hey, we like this subnet, we like this builder, we like this compute provider, you have this organic way for if people don't like the complexity or if the bureaucracy gets too complicated, they can just take their stake and they can switch somewhere else, right? And not to the lowest common denominator. You don't need 51% of people to agree with you. If it works for you, if you want to trust some benevolent dictator or totally democratic DAO, that's up to you. And having that marketplace, I think, is the ultimate feedback.
Yeah, I think in software engineering, we often act under principle of least commitment. At least the more senior you get, the more you do that, right? And you tend to develop more modular systems. You tend to reduce opinionation. And that's one of the things I think in the AI space, as far as I've seen it, Morpheus has done better than all of its peers, is it has created a more modular and least opinionated technology stack. So that if you don't like the Lumen router, create a different one. You don't like the Morpheus market system, want to change something about it, you can plug and play your own solution without having to reinvent the whole stack, right? You can basically integrate yourself into a larger framework and just argue for your improvement.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately makes most of the system, whatever parts are the least contentious, the most durable.
Yeah.
And that means we're wasting less of our time. It also allows you to get to market faster, frankly. Opinions take time. You have to reason about them and try and get them right the first time. Having less opinions means you be less thought, right?
Yeah.
Also creates less one-way doors, right? Because it makes more reversible decisions. There's less dependencies upon each decision that get built, or they're built in a way that has a clear delegation of responsibility. So it allows you to develop faster with less bureaucracy, with more resilience, lower cost. And I think you guys are doing a beautiful thing in that regard.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I agree. Having been around for those 2013, 2014 days, that's why I think Ethereum won for smart contracts. There were plenty of other smart contract platforms, right? Everything from BitShares to Counterparty and others, many of which ship code long before Ethereum did. But Ethereum took a fundamentally different approach. They said, hey, build anything you want. We're just going to provide the rails. And we're not going to compete. We're not going to build our own smart contracts and try to also be a smart contract developer, right? Because most of the projects at that point were trying to build the features into the protocol itself, as opposed to provide.
It was a blockchain for every, it was like an app chain.
Yep.
It was like the V0 of an app chain.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's the way to, I think, build the broadest and most resilient community. Don't have a lot of strong opinions about applications, provide great rails that anybody can use, and make it credibly neutral.
I think that has been a hopefully enlightening talk for a lot of people about the current state of DAI and what's going to be built and the challenges of it and where we're going in the next a year and next 4 years with agents and personalization, how AI is going to grow. I think we've covered a lot of good topics. That was enjoyable to everyone. Certainly been, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, David. I look forward to developing more with you. It's really been great to work with you so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was one community question about Venice. And so probably just pop that off at here at the end. This is the important next phase that Morpheus is moving into, is with builder awards. And so that next era, the Metropolis era, is coming up here later this month, looks like in the next week or two. And so when that goes live, that'll open up the opportunity for Venice and other ecosystem participants to become builders that people can stake towards. And that's, I think, what they're looking for the next iteration. Initially, anybody that deposited one more token got a Venice Pro account, and they're phasing that out and looking forward towards this full staking mechanism going live. So everybody's excited about that. Big shout out to Eric and Tina and the incredible folks at Venice. They're building the user distribution that is driving the demand for inference. And last I heard, they're over 300,000 users now with 100,000 daily actives, which is just incredible. And that's numbers as of a month ago. And excited to see the real adoption. I think that's what drives all of this. But just wanted to pop that in there. I think they're doing an amazing job.
Yeah, and I think that honestly answers the question that our community had, which was basically with Venice about to utilize Morpheus for their inference. What does that mean for Morpheus as a grand ecosystem and SETI as an inference provider? But I think you pretty much covered it. Venice is going to be a pretty big deal, and they've already got a large adoption. So I think that's wonderful to hear.
Yep, absolutely. That's the exciting thing, is decentralized AI already has a killer app. And Venice, I think, is that killer app for certainly for inference and how much they're seeing adoption. Turns out free AI is very popular.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys hopping on today, and we're definitely going to do this again at some point in the future. But I want to wrap things up and thank you guys for taking the time out today, and we'll let you guys know when the next space is. And yeah, enjoy your evening.
Absolutely. Talk soon.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.